Right now, somewhere in your kitchen, there's probably a bottle of wine, a six-pack, or at least a bottle of beer sitting in the fridge waiting for the weekend. You didn't invent that habit. You didn't even come close. Turns out, drinking alcohol might be one of the oldest deliberate behaviors humans ever developed. Older than writing, older than farming, older, possibly, than the wheel. So the question is, when did we actually figure this out? When did some ancient human look at a puddle of fermented fruit and think, yeah, I'm drinking that? Let's go back to the actual beginning. And weirdly, the beginning isn't even human. Fermentation happens naturally. Wild yeast lands on ripe fruit, breaks down the sugar, and produces alcohol as a byproduct. No humans required. This has been happening in forests for millions of years, long before anything resembling us existed. Which means, somewhere out there, animals found it first. Researchers studying primates have documented behavior suggesting some species deliberately seek out overripe, fermented fruit, the kind with a noticeable alcohol content. Not because they're getting drunk on purpose, necessarily, but because that fruit is often riper, sweeter, and easier to digest. Here's the part that changes everything, though. Some scientists propose something called the drunken monkey hypothesis. The idea that our primate ancestors developed a genetic mutation millions of years ago that made them dramatically better at metabolizing alcohol. Way better than most other animals. Which means, before we were even human, evolution may have already been quietly preparing us to drink. Think about that. Now, fast forward. Actual humans show up, and the fruit is still out there, fermenting on the ground, the exact same way it always has. It's not hard to imagine early humans eating fallen, overripe fruit simply because food was food, and calories were calories. And some of that fruit would have had a kick to it. But eating fermented fruit by accident is one thing. Making alcohol on purpose is a completely different leap. And that leap takes us to one of the oldest confirmed alcoholic beverages we've ever found. Traces of a fermented drink discovered in a cave dated back roughly 13,000 years. That's beer, brewed in a cave before farming even existed. Let that sit for a second. This wasn't some byproduct of an established civilization with granaries and breweries. This was hunter-gatherers, deliberately combining grain and water and letting it ferment thousands of years before anyone planted a single crop on purpose. Here's the problem with the old timeline we all learned in school. The traditional story goes, humans started farming grain to make bread, and beer came along later, almost as an accident. But some researchers now argue it might be the other way around. The theory goes like this. Early humans may have started deliberately gathering and storing wild grains specifically to make alcohol, and bread was the side effect, not the main event. If that's true, beer isn't a byproduct of agriculture. Beer might be one of the reasons agriculture happened at all. Same. Yeah, I'd also reorganize my entire way of life for beer. But seriously, think about what that means. If people were willing to settle down, store grain, defend that grain, and eventually plant more of it, all partly to keep the fermentation going, then alcohol wasn't just a fun side habit. It may have helped push humanity toward permanent settlements, toward stored food, toward the earliest versions of what we'd call civilization. Here's what makes this so important. Alcohol wasn't just about getting a buzz. In early communities, it likely served a much bigger social function. Fermented drinks were often safer to consume than plain water, especially once people were living in dense, settled groups where water sources could easily get contaminated. The fermentation process kills off a lot of harmful bacteria. So, in a strange twist, drinking alcohol may have actually kept early humans healthier than drinking straight from the river. And there's a social layer, too. Sharing a fermented drink around a fire wasn't just about the effect. It was a ritual, a reason to gather, a reason to sit together, lower your guard a little, and bond with people outside your immediate family. Some anthropologists suggest alcohol may have functioned as a kind of social glue, lowering inhibitions just enough to build trust between different families, different clans, even different tribes. You weren't just getting a buzz, you were building alliances. Let's push forward again. By the time we reach ancient civilizations like early Mesopotamia and Egypt, alcohol isn't a mysterious side habit anymore. It's fully embedded into daily life. In some early societies, beer wasn't a luxury. It was practically a food group. Workers were sometimes paid in it. It showed up in religious rituals. There are ancient written records, some of the earliest writing humans ever produced, that include recipes and instructions for brewing. Think about that for a second. Some of humanity's very first attempts at writing things down included instructions on how to make alcohol. We invented writing partly to make sure we didn't mess up the beer recipe. And it wasn't just beer. Wine developed independently in multiple regions, especially anywhere grapes or other sugary fruit grew naturally. Different environments, different ingredients, same basic idea. Let sugar and yeast do their thing, then drink the result. Here's the thing, though. This wasn't limited to one culture, one region, or one time period. Across nearly every ancient civilization we've studied, alcohol shows up again and again, independently invented, almost like it was inevitable. Which raises an uncomfortable but fascinating question. Was drinking really a choice? Or was it something closer to a biological pull we were always going to act on, the moment we had the tools to make it happen on purpose? Given the drunken monkey hypothesis, given how many separate cultures landed on fermentation independently, given how deeply it's woven into ritual, economy, and even the invention of writing, it starts to look less like a quirky habit and more like a fundamental piece of what pushed human societies forward. Not a footnote in history, a driving force behind it. So, here's the full picture. Millions of years ago, evolution may have already been tuning our bodies to handle alcohol before we were even human. Early humans stumbled onto fermented fruit by accident. Somewhere along the way, that accident became intentional. Roughly 13,000 years ago, someone in a cave brewed something that looked suspiciously like beer, before farming even existed. That habit may have helped push humans toward permanent settlements. It became safer than water. It became a ritual. It became currency, religion, and one of the very first things we bothered writing down. And now, thousands of years later, you're standing in your kitchen, cracking open a drink after a long week, without thinking twice about any of it. But you're not doing something new. You're doing one of the oldest things our species figured out how to do on purpose. Maybe that's the real story of being human. Not just that we survived, but that somewhere along the way, we decided survival wasn't enough. We wanted something a little more. If you're into this kind of deep dive into why we do the strange, ordinary things we do, stick around. There's a lot more of our own history sitting right under the surface.